Romantic historians sold you a fairy tale, and Hollywood directors lied to you for decades. They look at the sands of Giza and see the triumph of the human spirit and religious devotion. Utter nonsense. I look at these kingdoms and I do not see a beautiful spiritual utopia. I see a corporate Ponzi scheme, where an entire civilization fell victim to the sunk cost fallacy. Let us begin with their flagship infrastructure projects. Look at the Great Pyramid of Khufu. You are conditioned to see a wonder of the world, but put on your auditor glasses and look at the math. We are talking about 2.5 million blocks of limestone and solid granite. Some weigh 80 tons, and they dragged them across the desert with no wheels, pulleys, or iron tools. It is an administrative marvel, but from an investment perspective, it is a fiscal nightmare. The return on investment is a literal 0%. How did the ancient state finance this? Egypt did not have fiat currency, and they did not mint coins until the very end of their civilization. Their economy ran entirely on a grain standard, acting as a massive agricultural monopoly. They collected taxes in wheat and barley, storing it in state-run granaries as the first central banks. Then they paid it out as wages. The labor force was not Hollywood slaves, but a mandatory corvée system. When the Nile flooded annually and fields could not be worked, the government conscripted the peasantry. They made them haul heavy rocks across the sand, and the pay was daily rations of bread and beer. Think about the opportunity cost. The Egyptian state took 100% of its national GDP. They poured it into limestone paperweights for generations, and these structures produced nothing. They did not improve maritime trade, advance metallurgy, secure borders, or increase crop yields. Imagine a modern CEO liquidating a Fortune 500 company to build a concrete triangle in the desert. Wall Street would institutionalize him, but in Egypt, this was called the national ideology. The pyramids are just the tip of the iceberg. The true economic meat grinder was the death industry. The center of this industry was a ruthless cartel of priests, acting as a macroeconomic monopoly. They controlled 30% of the arable land, owned the cattle, and monopolized the granaries. Most importantly, they controlled the narrative through a society-wide marketing campaign. They convinced an entire nation of one rule: if your physical body rots, your soul vanishes forever. Congratulations, they invented the perfect product with absolute 100% inelastic demand. You cannot boycott death, and you cannot negotiate with eternity. It was built on existential terror. They sold salvation as a service, and Herodotus actually audited their masterpiece of corporate greed. Tier 1 was the enterprise package, exclusively designed for royals and the ultra-rich elites. The process took 70 days. They extracted the brain through the nose using a specialized iron hook. They surgically removed internal organs, washed them in premium palm wine, and placed them in jars. Then they desiccated the body using pure natron, a natural salt monopolized by the state priests. After drying, they wrapped the body in hundreds of yards of fine linen from temple-owned workshops. The astronomical cost equaled the lifetime earnings of 12 highly skilled Egyptian artisans. The cartel wanted maximum revenue, meaning they absolutely could not ignore the profitable middle class. Enter Tier 2, the Pro package. It was a budget-friendly alternative without surgical extraction. Priests took a syringe of corrosive cedar oil and injected it directly into the client's rectum. They plugged it up and waited while the caustic oil liquefied the internal organs into biological sludge. After a few weeks, they unplugged the client, drained the waste, and returned a hollowed-out husk. It was extremely cheap, required minimal labor, and kept the temple's daily turnover rates high. For the absolute poorest citizens, there was Tier 3, the stripped-down, basic, freemium model. They simply rinsed the body with cheap radish juice and threw it into a communal salt pit. No custom sarcophagus and no VIP afterlife. Just the bare minimum to keep the working class compliant. The cartel was not satisfied with taking your life savings at death. They wanted residual income. They invented microtransactions because the Egyptian afterlife was not a relaxing celestial paradise. The gods expected manual labor, meaning you still had to plow the celestial fields for eternity. But the priests offered a loophole. You could purchase small clay Ushapti figures to do your chores. The catch? You needed one for every day of the year. That is 365 statues. But clay statues might get lazy, so you had to buy 36 overseer statues with little whips. You bought this useless clay army exclusively from temple gift shops at a massive corporate markup. We have not even discussed RM protection, the digital rights management of the ancient world. Entering the afterlife required a divine audit called the weighing of the heart. If you failed, a crocodile hippopotamus hybrid monster immediately ate your soul. To guarantee a passing grade, the corrupt priests sold a magical cheat code called the Book of the Dead. It was not a holy scripture, but a compilation of legal loopholes to hack the divine bureaucracy. Temples mass-produced these scrolls with blank spaces for the buyer's name, like a legal template. You paid solid gold for a generic PDF, filled in your name, and buried it with your dead corpse. Look at the macroeconomic consequences. For 3,000 years, Egypt drained its own economy. They took tangible assets like gold, silver, and weapons, and systematically buried them in the desert. This is an illiquid asset crisis. They starved the living economy and created a deflationary spiral. The wealth of the nation was trapped underground, and the market eventually corrected itself. In Egypt, that violent market correction was called grave robbing by ancient venture capitalists. Historians weep over plundered tombs, but grave robbers performed aggressive quantitative easing. They saw millions of ounces of dead capital, dug it up, and injected it back into the living economy. Grave robbers bought grain, bribed local officials, and were the only ones actually balancing the budget. Eventually, the bankrupt state joined the looting. By the end of the New Kingdom, the treasury was empty. The government could not pay mercenaries or workers, so high priests initiated state-sponsored robbing. Officials systematically opened the grand tombs, stripped the pharaohs of gold, and pawned the jewelry. They tossed the royal mummies into a single mass grave like expired warehouse inventory. The government ripped gold teeth from its own grandparents just to keep the lights on. Finally, the Ponzi scheme crashed. The bubble burst in 1159 BC. When Ramses III was in power. The state failed to deliver monthly grain and beer rations to the elite tomb builders. The workers realized they were starving to death while building luxury condos for corpses. They dropped their tools, marched out of the necropolis, and staged a massive sit-in at the temple. It was the first recorded labor strike in human history. The workers simply audited the state. They looked at the empty granaries and said they refused to accept bounced checks anymore. The Egyptian economy turned gold into dead flesh, bankrupting the living to optimize for the grave. Class dismissed. Before you clock out, your audit assignment is waiting in the comments section. What modern premium product wastes your salary? What is your personal VIP mummy package? Convince me it is not a scam. Smash that like button and subscribe to the Bureau's archives. It is the only metric keeping this channel alive and keeping you out of the copper mines. Next time, we fly to Rome to audit the ancient gladiator economy. Do not be late.